Quiet down. The stars glow above, the moon hangs high, and it is time to wrap yourselves in blankets. Take a gentle breath. Tonight, our bedtime magic carries us past the shore and deep into the sparkling blue ocean. Beneath the waves lived a young mermaid. She possessed a voice sweeter than any instrument, a melody that rippled through the coral reefs and danced among the swaying seagrass. While she loved her vibrant home, she often swam to the surface, breaking the water with her eyes to watch the sky. She spent hours tracking the movement of the clouds and the distant flicker of lights from passing ships. She wondered about the world of humans, a place where the air was dry and the ground was solid. Every evening, she would drift near the surface, listening to the rhythmic slap of waves against the wood of passing vessels. She felt the pull of that unknown world, a silent question growing in her chest. She would trace the patterns of the moon on the water, waiting for a sign, a glimpse, or a sound from the world above. The ocean was vast, but her curiosity was wider. The horizon darkened without warning. The wind shifted, turning from a gentle breeze into a howling gale that whipped the sea into a frenzy. A grand ship groaned, its timber snapping under the pressure of waves that rose like jagged mountains. Lightning fractured the sky, illuminating the chaos below. A young prince stood on the deck, fighting to keep his footing as the vessel tilted violently. A massive wave crashed down, sweeping across the deck and dragging him into the churning, freezing dark. He vanished beneath the foam. The mermaid, watching from the safety of the deep, saw the silhouette of the ship splinter. She did not hesitate. She kicked her tail, propelling herself upward through the turbulent currents. The water was heavy and cold, filled with debris and swirling sand, but she pushed harder. She scanned the dark expanse, her eyes darting through the bubbles and spray. She saw a flicker of movement below the surface. She dove deeper, tucking her body to cut through the resistance of the water. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the prince. She grabbed him, pulling him tight against her, and began the long, desperate ascent toward the faint light of the surface. Every muscle strained as she fought the weight of the ocean. She breached the surface, gasping for air, and dragged his weight onto the wet, coarse sand. The tide pulled at her, but she dug her fingers into the beach, hauling him further until he lay clear of the crashing foam. He was still. She pressed her ear to his chest, listening for the faint, steady rhythm of a heartbeat. It was there, slow and rhythmic. To stir him, she began to hum. It was a melody without words, a sound that rose from her throat like the tide itself, vibrating against the cool night air. She sang, her voice weaving through the sound of the wind, soft and persistent. The prince's eyelids twitched. He shifted, his hand brushing the sand. Then his eyes fluttered open, blinking against the moonlight. He sat up, his gaze sweeping the empty beach, and whispered, "Where? Who was singing? Hello?" The sound of his voice startled her. She scrambled backward, her movements frantic as she splashed back into the surf. She swam to a jagged rock near the shoreline, pulling herself up just enough to peek over the edge. She watched him stand, his silhouette swaying in the dark, searching the empty coast. When the sun rose, the prince was back. He walked the length of the shoreline, his boots leaving deep prints in the damp sand. He stopped at the spot where he had awakened, turning in slow circles, scanning the horizon for any sign of the singer. He called out, his voice thin against the roar of the surf, but only the wind answered. Day after day, he returned. He paced the dunes, his brow furrowed, his eyes searching every wave that broke against the coast. He picked up a smooth, white shell from the sand, turning it over in his palm, hoping it held some echo of the melody. He left it on a flat stone, a silent offering, before walking away with his head bowed. From the safety of the kelp beds, the mermaid watched him. She saw the slump of his shoulders and the way he lingered long after the light had faded. The sight of his quiet persistence pulled at her. She turned away from the surface, her decision hardening. She would find a way to walk upon the earth, to stand beside him on the sand. She swam away from the familiar coral, descending into the cold, lightless trenches where the water grew thick and heavy. The current pulled her toward a jagged, narrow fissure in the seabed. She pushed through, her skin brushing against sharp, calcified walls. Inside, the cave was absolute darkness, save for 2 points of flickering, sickly light that pulsed in the gloom. The sea witch emerged from the shadows, her presence heavy and suffocating. She moved with a slow, serpentine grace, circling the mermaid. The witch stopped, a jagged grin spreading across her face as she sensed the desperation radiating from her visitor. "I know what you want, little fish," the witch hissed. "You crave legs to walk on the dry earth, to stand beside your prince. I can grant this, but the price is absolute. Your voice must be mine." The mermaid felt the weight of the silence that would follow. She looked toward the distant surface. She nodded, her throat tightening. The witch reached into a hidden crevice, pulling out a vial filled with a swirling, bubbling liquid. The mermaid took it, her hand trembling. She tilted her head back and swallowed the liquid in one sharp motion. It burned, a cold, biting fire that raced from her throat down to her spine. She dropped the empty vial, which shattered against the stone floor. Her body convulsed, a sudden, violent spasm that forced her to curl into a ball. The water around her turned murky and dark as the change took hold. She felt the structure of her tail shift, the scales hardening and then splitting, bone knitting into new, unfamiliar shapes. She tried to scream, to release the pressure building in her chest, but her throat locked. Not a single sound escaped. She thrashed, her new limbs striking the cave floor with clumsy, heavy force. The transformation slowed, leaving her gasping for air that was not there. She pushed herself up, dragging her body toward the faint, distant light of the surface. She hauled herself over the threshold of the cave and onto the wet, coarse sand of the beach. She lay there, chest heaving, the tide washing over her legs. She opened her mouth to call out, to test if the melody remained, but the air simply passed through her lips. The world was deafeningly quiet. She stared at the horizon, her hands clawing into the sand, realizing the silence was absolute. She was on land, she was whole, but she was entirely, terrifyingly mute. The prince found her shivering on the shoreline as the morning tide receded. He wrapped her in a heavy cloak and carried her to the palace, his questions met only by her wide, searching eyes. Inside the stone walls, she was a stranger to the world of stairs and corridors. She stumbled on the polished marble, her legs feeling heavy and strange, but she refused to remain idle. When she saw the palace staff struggling with heavy linens, she stepped in, her hands moving with practiced efficiency to fold and stack. She spent hours in the gardens, kneeling in the dirt to prune overgrown roses and clear debris from the fountains. One afternoon, she accidentally tipped a heavy ceramic vase, the crash echoing through the hall. She froze, heart hammering, but instead of fleeing, she knelt to gather the shards, her fingers bleeding slightly as she worked to restore the floor. The prince watched from the doorway, noting her steady, focused movements. She did not seek praise, she simply moved from task to task. She was kneeling in the garden, meticulously clearing the winter frost from the stone path, when the wind suddenly died. The heavy scent of blooming jasmine vanished, replaced by a sharp, clean ozone that tasted of starlight. She looked up, her hands still stained with dark earth. Above, the clouds parted, not for the moon, but for a cascade of shimmering, silver light that poured down like liquid silk. The palace staff dropped their tools, shielding their eyes as the glow intensified. The light coalesced into figures, tall and weightless. One spirit reached out, fingers trailing through the air, and touched the mermaid gently on her throat. She gasped, and the sound was not a breath, but a clear, crystalline note that rippled outward. The garden erupted in color. As the spirits drew her upward, her feet leaving the soil, she rose higher, the weight of her human form dissolving into the brilliance. The prince stood on the balcony, watching as she ascended, her silhouette merging with the constellations. The silence shattered, replaced by a song. High above the sleeping world, the light settled into a steady, comforting glow. The mermaid took her place among the constellations, her presence now a permanent fixture in the velvet expanse of the night. She looked down at the palace, then at the vast, darkened ocean, and finally, toward the windows, where children lay resting. She began to sing. It was not the loud, triumphant note of her return, but a soft, rhythmic hum that traveled through the cool night air. The stars pulsed in time with her melody, casting a gentle, silver light that settled over the rooftops and the trees. She watched over the quiet earth, her voice acting as a steady anchor for the drifting mind. The wind slowed to a whisper, carrying the faint, melodic vibration across the hills. She moved her hand, and the moonlight seemed to brighten, bathing the world in a soft, protective sheen. Every note she hummed was a thread of calm weaving through the stillness. The ocean waves below slowed their pace, matching the rhythm of her song. The world grew heavy, quiet, and still. Her melody deepened, a slow, steady pulse that invited the eyes to close and the breath to even out. She remained there, a silent guardian in the vast dark, singing the world into a deep, dream-filled rest. The night is safe, the stars are bright. It is time to let go of the day. Close your eyes, breathe deep, and drift into the quiet. Sleep now. Good night.